Our Parents Ourselves is the 12th episode of the 6th season of Frasier. This is directed by Pamela Fryman, and as always there will be spoilers from now as I go through the episode and share some thoughts. And as is usually the case with Frasier, it's a really great episode. It starts off with KCL and Frasier has to answer a question about football and Roz does this mime, and I have to say I had no idea what they were talking about. I don't know anything about football, but it was very entertaining. And we then establish the main narrative, and that's the fact that Roz's mother is visiting her, and Frasier suggests setting her mother up with Martin because Roz could do with a break, and Martin has been spending a lot of time alone and he hasn't really dated since Sherry, so this is the plan going forward. And Martin is out to dinner with Niles and Frasier. And the waitress approaches them and recognises Frasier, and Martin points out that Niles is his other son. He doesn't say his name, and the waitress turns around to him and said, "Nice to meet you, Eddie," which I absolutely love. Roz then coincidentally happens to come in with her mother, and they all sit together. Her mother is Joanna Doyle, played by Eva Marie Saint, and at the end of the meal, Frasier suddenly remembers that he and Roz need to go and look at some promos. So, oh no, Roz can't go out with her mother that night, so why doesn't Martin take her out? They leave, and I love the fact that Joanna and Martin were very aware that they had just been set up, and Martin pointed out, "We're just a retired detective and an attorney general." I love the fact that he's basically saying we may be older, but we're not stupid, and I rather enjoyed that quite a lot. We're then back at Frasier's apartment. Frasier and Roz are quite nervous because they don't know how things have gone, and Daphne seemed to call Roz a tramp. She didn't. She was referring to something on the television, but Frasier and Roz's expressions when they turned to look at Daphne was just fantastic. It was a brilliant, brilliant moment. And then Martin comes back in, Roz and Joanna leave, and Martin tells Frasier that it was a very dull evening. And Martin can still hear her voice in his head, and Roz runs back upstairs to tell Frasier that Joanna actually had a really great time. So it was a very different experience for both of them. But to Martin's credit, if Joanna had a good time, that means that he was being polite. He wasn't making it obvious that he was bored. So I think that's definitely in Martin's favour, even though he may have had some not nice things to say about her afterwards. And we're then down at Cafe Nervosa, and Roz is there, and Frasier doesn't really know how to tell her that Martin didn't enjoy the evening and he doesn't want to see Joanna again, but Joanna is expecting him to call. So they end up inviting Roz and Joanna, or she kind of invites herself over to watch the Super Bowl on Sunday. And Frasier can't think of a good reason why that wouldn't work, because initially he was using the Super Bowl as an excuse for why Martin couldn't see Joanna at the weekend. So now, not only does he have to try and tell Martin that he has to spend Sunday with Joanna, Sunday being an important day for Martin because he likes the Super Bowl, but now Frasier and Niles also have to watch the Super Bowl. So it's not a great time for anybody, except maybe Joanna initially. We are then on Sunday, and they decided to not tell him until the last minute. There's a knock at the door. It must be Roz and Joanna, so Frasier tells Martin the plan, and then Martin opens the door and it's Bonnie, the waitress from McGinty's. She's played by Alice Playten, and Martin had invited her over, and obviously that's going to be a little bit awkward. So when Roz and Joanna arrived, my thought was, how on earth are they going to get away with this? How are they going to explain this? Well, Frasier kind of said that Bonnie was there for Niles, as a setup for Niles, and obviously Niles is not happy about this, Martin's not happy about this, nobody is happy in this situation. Martin then manages to escape very briefly. He goes to show Bonnie baby Alice, who's in the bedroom, and unfortunately he explains what's happening to Bonnie, which makes sense. It's important that she knows why it seems like she's being set up with Niles. And he also explains about Joanna, and the baby monitor was on, which is very, very awkward. And Joanna pointed out that she'd been called worse than boring before, which is fair enough. Being called boring is maybe not the biggest insult, but it's still not something you want to hear, particularly in a crowded room. There were a lot of people there listening to Martin saying some not nice things about Joanna, so it wasn't a great moment. But it's not like Martin knew the baby monitor was on, but I guess the lesson there is that if you're in a room with a baby, don't assume that nobody can hear you, because chances are there is a baby monitor. And the ending was quite interesting, because Roz is finally no longer annoyed at Frasier. She realises Frasier wasn't meaning to hurt anybody by lying about how Martin felt. And they both confess that they're both eager to set their parents up, because they look at their parents being single in their older age and worrying that that's going to be them one day. And Frasier quite sweetly suggested that they make a pact to get married if they're not married by a certain point, but Roz suggested making a pact to kill each other would make more sense, which Frasier said was basically the same thing. So it was a nice way to end things. The final scene is actually in Cafe Nervosa with Niles and his coffee problems, and it was a fun way to end things. It might not be the funniest episode. I did laugh a couple of times. I think my favourite was "Nice to meet you, Eddie." I did enjoy that a lot, but it's definitely an interesting narrative. I think it's very thought-provoking and unpredictable as well. So, needless to say, I thought Our Parents, Ourselves was a really decent episode of Frasier. Definitely one that I really thoroughly enjoyed.